I'm sure you've heard the research that we have to be good communicators at work and in our everyday lives, but it can be tricky. And I hope that this course will help demystify and explain what communication is and what it's not. So let's dive in. If you have your ebook, pull it up. You can follow along. If you have the hard copy, it will look something like this. I cannot stress what a great textbook this is. And I'm not going to read this whole chapter. My goal for each chapter, just like the first one, is to give you a 10,000-foot view of the chapter. I'm going to highlight some things, so don't feel like this is an hour-long lecture. Just buckle up and let's jump in together about the communication, what and how. We're going to look at communication and its definitions. You're going to see some words in this first chapter that you may not have heard before, like symbolic. Sometimes communication is about symbols, things that are represented by our gestures, or maybe actual things. Communication is a process. It's not just talking. We can break it down in the way that you would a chemistry formula or an engineering schematic, or even in our bodies. Digestion is a process. So is communication. It kind of emerged from business and psychology, so you'll hear some overlap if you're taking any of those classes, but we want to look at what that is. It's really important that you also know that part of the fundamental truths of communication is that it's irreversible. There's a great movie where one of the key characters says something and expresses her feelings, and then she wants to take it back. And her partner says, "You can't take it back. It's already out there." I wanted to do something, but I'm in a recording studio and I can't have extra sticky things. But if you're at home watching this, I want you to do something kind of odd. And I know this is crazy, but it will help you understand and maybe the people around you. I want you to get one of those sample toothpastes. Maybe one they gave you when you got your last dental cleaning, or you picked up for a trip, or maybe you got one at a hotel. I want you to squeeze the toothpaste out. Then I want you to take a toothpick and try to put it back in. I wish I could do it right here for you, but I'm going to guess that you'll find it's really difficult. Sometimes our communication is like that. We have squirted it out and it's hard to get it back in, but it is repairable, and that's where the relational piece comes in. One of the things I hope you take away from this chapter is that everything we communicate has a few dimensions: content, the words that we use, and relationship. So someone you like could tell you the same thing that someone you don't like tells you, and you will hear them and interpret them different. Okay, there's strengths and challenges to communication. Sometimes I get to present to companies, managers, employees, and even executives. They really struggle at all levels to articulate what are the challenges of communication. We know that more isn't necessarily better. I want you in this module to think about what are your strengths of communicating and what are your weaknesses. And I want you to see in this chapter what are some challenges. Now, fundamentally, we promise a university you transfer to or an employer that you work for that if you take this course, you will know the models of communication. And we start with this linear one. So I want to really show you that early on in the field of communication, we created communication in a line. So there was a sender and there was a receiver. Now in 1940s, the 1950s, we had a few channels through which the sender could send messages to the receiver. Sometimes it was sound waves if you're face-to-face. Your other options were pretty limited. A telegraph, mail, and that was about it. Today we have so many different channels, but we really started saying there's a sender, there's a receiver. They have to decide how, that's the channel to send the message. When they send the message, sometimes they add meaning. We call that encoding. The receiver then has to decode it. A great example of that would be if I add sarcasm to my language. Then if you understand sarcasm, you would decode it. And if you didn't, might create a miscommunication. We also know that the sender has an environment they're sending it in. The receiver has an environment. There's some elements you see up there that are really crucial, and those will come into play as we get into further chapters. But I want you to pay close attention to the word noise. There is noise all around us trying to intercept the messages that we send. The noise happens inside of us and the noise happens outside of us. So right now while you're listening to this, the TV could be on, a child could be talking, a washer could be going, there could be all kinds of noise around you, and that's trying to intercept the message. When people say, I'm not a great communicator, well, the cards are stacked against you because there's a lot of noise. We also have an internal noise. Noise like I'm worried, I'm fearful. Those are psychological, physiological, could be I'm tired and I'm hungry and my head hurts. And those are all designed to inhibit or prevent you from getting the messages that people are sending to you. So senders and receivers are always involved. We are always encoding and decoding messages. We're always having to choose our channel. And we have something called mediated communication that happens with technology. And then finally, there's noise that is prohibiting the message. And that often depends on our environment. There was a really cool guy named Watzlawick who came up with this transactional model. And you'll notice it's not that different. Except that he said we are sending and receiving messages all the time. So instead of it feeling like a linear, we started to say, this is happening in real time. So much is happening. So I'm reading your nonverbals while you're talking to me and while I'm talking. And then it gets really messy because we have to slow down and really think about what's happening. So many of the things are the same. We just added a little bit of feedback. So we took all the elements of the linear model, and then we said, turns out those are happening simultaneously. We also said good, healthy communication has to have some kind of a feedback loop. How are we asking? In this class, I hope to model feedback well. That will come through email, or it may come through announcements, or it may come through some video updates that I send based on the messages that you're sending to me. So I want you to think about how noisy is your communication. How well do you cut out the noise? How well do you work to receive messages? So I think that's really important. And in your assignment, one of your assignments this week is going to be start to identify the noise around you. We can't help what we don't know. And so start to identify external noise. Maybe you need to find a quieter place to study or to meet with friends. Oftentimes, if I have a friend I haven't seen in a long time and they say, let's go to a restaurant, my first question is, how noisy is the place? Because my goal is to connect with the person across from me, and I want to eliminate noise as much as I can. You're going to learn in this chapter about different communication contexts. That's really important, and it affects what is said and what is heard. We have intrapersonal context. If we're talking to ourselves, that's me talking to me. So that's me trying to study or process. Everything is happening inside my head. We also have dyadic or interpersonal. That's me with another person one-on-one. We have small group communication that adds a whole nother layer of dynamics, but that can happen anywhere from about 3 to 12 people. We have organizational context. This is one of my research passions. I love studying organizational context. How can we communicate effectively within our workspaces, with the people that we interact with? I often, when I'm doing training, say I'm just here to help make work not suck. I stole that from an organizational psychologist named Adam Grant, who does lots of research, and he does the Work-Life podcast for the TED organization. But we need to know that there are power dynamics and there are difficulties in getting feedback and being heard and also sending messages. Lots of channels involved with organizations. We have public contexts, which are tricky, and to be honest, getting harder and harder to send and receive messages, because in public context, we tend to talk about different topics. We avoid some, and we're open to others. Finally, mass communication. This is a huge umbrella that we'll find social media in, that we'll talk a lot this semester about, and also you'll hear about TV and radio. So in this module, really want you to think about that. Let's look at the what and how social media. When I started studying communication 25 years ago, social media didn't exist. Just as I was graduating college, MySpace came into play, so that's how old I am. So I want you to know that so many of the what and how and the rules and the understanding change when it comes to social media. The audience size is massive. We have updates all the time, so it's changing a lot. They're diverse networks. So sometimes we know the ages we're reaching or the demographics, the ethnicity. Sometimes we don't. We have this tendency to sometimes get angry. You're going to see a term called flaming. I want you to kind of investigate that. You need to start to ask yourself as you're reading this chapter, saying, I want to be a better communicator. So many of you express that. I want to be a more competent communicator, to know how to express myself and maybe to know when. So I want you to really look at this area in your textbook so you'll learn to say to share or not to share. I love helping people really develop communication competence. That means they're an intelligent communicator, an aware communicator. They know the right channel to choose. They pick up on nonverbal cues. All the things we learned this semester are going to make you competent, not just at home, but in your workspaces, your school spaces, and also maybe where you play. So here's what you need to remember. There's no ideal or perfect way to communicate. We all have different patterns and processes, but we need to be open to learning. We have to know that communication is situational. What works at home may not work at work, and what works in your classroom may not work at a coffee shop with your friends. Fundamentally, it has to be relational. Communication should always lead to connection. Research says if we have healthy connections, relationships in our lives, we will live over 2 years longer than the average person. So we want to do this well, but we have to come at it from the attitude that we want to relationally connect. It's not a skill you're born with. It can be learned. So don't forget that. Okay, a few last things. Be flexible in your communication. That's a really hard one. And the older you get, you develop patterns. You'll notice older people tend to be less flexible, empathic. You're going to learn this semester about the difference between sympathy and empathy, but empathic communication really thinks about the other person. Cognitive complexity means cognitive is thinking, complexity is complex. The thinking and the process, it can be a lot. But it is possible if you'll monitor yourself. You'll start to think, how am I doing? Am I doing well? And then let's be committed to doing it right or to getting it right. So I often say to my coworkers, listen, in this situation, I don't have to be right, but I want to get it right. And if we have a commitment to improving our communication competence, that will go a long way. Okay, what communication isn't? So these are some miscommunications, that it is complicated. Now, does it require some thinking at times? Yes. But if we have an attitude of humility and a willingness to learn and to listen, we don't have to overcomplicate it. Meanings are not in words, they're in people. And a word to someone may mean something else, and a place to someone may mean something else to you that it means to them. And so we have to remember that the meanings are held in the person that interpreted it. More isn't always better. I tell a story when I introduce a class often, and you've probably already heard it, about when I was 7 and I wanted a teacher to like me. And I did all the things and tried to be the best student. And when I finally got brave enough to ask if she did, she said no, because you talk too much. And at 7 years old, I learned pretty quickly that just talking doesn't make people like you. And it's actually not maybe the most effective communication. So I've spent decades of my life trying to get better at it, and you'll learn that more isn't always better. There is such a thing as too much communication. It's a tricky dance. In organizations, too many emails is a problem. Too many meetings are a problem. It can be difficult. We want to really think about what we're doing communication wise. So let's wrap it up. We have spent almost 20 minutes, which 20 years ago was the length of a TED Talk. I wanted to give you a 10,000 foot view. I want you to jump into this chapter, focus on those communication models and the elements of it, really start to think about what it is and what it's not, and ultimately make a decision that you'll become a better communicator where you work, where you live, and where you play. Communication should always lead to connection. And I hope after you read this chapter, you'll begin to feel more connected to both yourself and to the people around you.